I want to thank you all for coming here today. It's quite an honor. Though I'm not an alum of Hillsdale College, I often find myself wishing I were with the company of people I meet here. I can take some satisfaction in that many of my professors were classmates or teachers of the teachers at Hillsdale College, but I truly wish I had known of Hillsdale when I actually applied to school now seems like many years ago. Calvin Coolidge, of course, was our last classically educated president, and I think he would have felt right at home at Hillsdale, a school founded on the truth that all are created equal, and which sent many of its best and brightest to fight and even to die so that Lincoln's hope that right might live. Hillsdale's motto, pursuing truth, defending liberty, is certainly something that Coolidge would have embraced. Fittingly, for those of us who understand that those who control the schoolhouse door ultimately control the White House, our subject is education, and what Calvin Coolidge, a neglected statesman, has to teach us about our contemporary politics and our own political order. As Tom Silver, the late president of the Claremont Institute, has shown, Calvin Coolidge wasn't so much silent as silenced by the New Deal historians who, unable to argue with the successes of his policies or the thought behind them, rewrote history to cast Coolidge as a villain or to caricaturize him. These New Deal historians had their work cut out for them, however. Coolidge, after all, proceeded over one of the largest expansions in economic growth in American history, and he had a lot to say. Coolidge gave over 500 press conferences during his presidency. He ran for office 19 times and won 18 times, working his way up from city councilman to president of the United States. Truly a small R Republican statesman. He was the last president to write his own speeches, and he penned 3 collections. He published a thoughtful autobiography after his presidency and wrote a very successful, internationally syndicated post-presidential column. My book, Why Coolidge Matters, is intended to faithfully report what Coolidge actually had to say and what he did say in the hope that we might restore his views about limited government, American independence, and constitutionalism. His thinking on immigration, civil rights, foreign policy, government unions, and especially liberal education warrant considerable attention by politicians today. This is, I believe, because Calvin Coolidge was a deeply religious man. He did not think a republic was possible without moral and religious education. And he believed that the Holy Writ's command, "You shall know the truth and it shall set you free," ought to be the guiding principle in all of our educational system as well as our republic. America, he argued, was founded by religious men. Its finest schools, he reasoned, succeeded because they sought to shape souls as well as opinions. And as we know, great presidents are products of their education. Coolidge knew well the value of education because his political thought had been shaped at Amherst, where, under the tutelage of its most famous professor, Charles Garmin, a professor of philosophy, Coolidge learned everything he needed to know about politics. William James called Garmin the greatest teacher in the United States, and Coolidge absolutely loved him. He dedicated 6 pages of his very slim autobiography to that old professor. And after he died, Coolidge's wife recounted that Garmin's works sat on his nightstand table throughout his presidency, along with Paradise Lost and the Bible. Coolidge considered Garmin, quote, one of the most remarkable men, end quote, with whom he had ever come into contact. He drew men out, Coolidge wrote, referring to himself. Garmin's students saw in him qualities that they wished to develop in themselves: intellectual curiosity, tolerance, and idealism. Some students did develop those qualities in abundance, and Coolidge drew upon these men to form his government in times of crisis. Dwight Morrow, ambassador to Mexico, William Whiting, Secretary of Commerce, and Harlan F. Stone, Attorney General and later Supreme Court Justice. Never philosophically and perhaps physically far from his professor's lectures, Coolidge never forgot them or opposed their political teachings. Coolidge believed, as Garmin did, that choosing the right thing would refresh the soul, sharpen the mind, and bring its just reward from providence in the here and now. Quote, "We looked upon Garmin as a man who walked with God," Coolidge recalled. His course was a demonstration of the existence of a personal God, of our power to know him, of the divine eminence and of the complete dependence of all the universe on him as the creator and father in whom we live and move and have our being. Every reaction in the universe is a manifestation of his presence. Man was revealed as his son, and nature is the hem of his garment. While through a common fatherhood we are all embraced in a common brotherhood. The conclusions which followed from this position were logical and inescapable. It sets man off in a separate kingdom from all the other creatures in the universe and makes him a true son of God and partaker of the divine nature. This is the warrant for man's freedom and the demonstration of his equality. It does not assume all are equal in degree, but that all are equal in kind. On that precept rests a foundation for democracy that cannot be shaken. And this is a theme that Coolidge would return to over and over again throughout his presidency and throughout his political career. Most important for our purposes, Garmin taught his students the religious basis for Republican government, reasoning that as we have a common fatherhood, common father in God the Father, we are brothers, and therefore only Republican government is possible. That men should live together in community as Christ did, as servants, not masters. That politics doesn't mean survival of the fittest, but sacrifice of the fittest. That it means men giving up their seats on the Titanic so that women and children might live, as Coolidge noted. And that the central teachings of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, need to be applied to the issues of his day, as well as, I would argue, to our own. Coolidge applied Garmin's ideas and these ideas time and time again to issues of civil rights for blacks, women, and Native Americans, to immigration and how we might make immigrants American, to the impossibility of public sector unions and a republic where all are created equal, and even to foreign policy, where he rejected the Kaiser's pretension to rule the free men and women of Europe, and his first fights, of course, with the Bolshevists, who he refused to recognize as the rightful rulers of Russia. Indeed, even Coolidge's more controversial acts, which we can feel free to discuss in the question and answer period, the Immigration Act of 1924, the tariff, and his early progressivism, have in their origins his thinking on the Declaration. To defend the Declaration, Coolidge knew that he would have to politically defeat the nihilists of his day, the Klan, the eugenicists, the communists, and the anarchists, whose campaign of bombing and agitation is eerily similar to that which took place earlier this week. Coolidge did this by understanding that man has a spiritual nature, that those who adhere to it will ultimately be triumphant, even in moments of despair. Quote, touch that spiritual nature and it will respond as the magnet responds to the pole. Quote, the most spiritual document in Coolidge's view was the Declaration. Coolidge, owing to his belief in divine intervention, used highly religious language when discussing it. In his eyes, the document was, quote, a miracle, inspiring a reverence that helped bring pilgrims of every nation to America's shores. People at home and abroad alike, Coolidge said, considered Independence Hall a hallowed ground and revered the Liberty Bell as a sacred relic. These symbols represent a spiritual event, and America had become, quote, a holy land. Now, I understand that Hillsdale students read Coolidge's speech on the 100th anniversary of the Declaration signing. But my favorite Coolidge speech on the Declaration is the one he delivered at the home of Daniel Webster on July 4th, 1916. It's important to consider that while some of Coolidge's language might sound a bit, for lack of a better phrase, neocon, he really would have agreed with John Quincy Adams' idea that while Americans are friends of liberty everywhere, they're custodians only of their own. Nevertheless, he thought that our principles could have their expression in other regimes, and indeed would. So with that, I'll read a short selection from that speech. The events of history may have added to the Declaration, but they have subtracted nothing. Wisdom and experience have strengthened the admiration of it. Time and criticism have not shaken it. But however worthy of our reverence and admiration, however preeminent, it was only one incident of a great forward movement of the human race, of which the American Revolution was itself only a larger incident. It was not so much a struggle of the colonies against the tyranny of bad government as against wrong principles of government and for self-government. It was man realizing himself. And Coolidge would go on. That realization persisted through time and touched all men's souls as it moved from Concord and Yorktown, marching on to Paris, to London, to Moscow, to Peking. Men of every clime respected the Declaration for, quote, it marked the entry of new forces and new ideals into human affairs. It represented the real